Hello, class. So in this short lecture, what I'd like to do is talk about writing the philosophy paper. Philosophy paper is a little special. It's different from the traditional college term paper, even the argumentative paper that you may have learned to write in an English class. Mainly, those are matters of emphasis, but where the philosophy paper tends to emphasize certain things above others. We'll talk about that in detail. But the object of this is how to get a good grade in writing a philosophy paper, right? And I'm looking forward to reading all of your papers, and I hope that this is very helpful. All right, so let's proceed. Now, you'll be familiar with these, so-called modes of persuasion from rhetoric: ethos, pathos, and logos. And to be sure, you'll want to make use of them in papers that you write in a philosophy class. But focus on logos. If you have to sacrifice pathos and ethos, it's all right. Sacrifice them on the altar of logos. Philosophers are interested in the best reasons and their logical strength, right? We are seeking the truth irrespective of ethos and pathos. So we're focusing almost to a fault at times on logos, sometimes even to the expense of ethos and pathos. Aristotle, whose philosophy is so influential in contemporary rhetoric, argued that the only reason we should study ethos and pathos is to keep from being hoodwinked by dishonest rhetoricians, and to try and persuade the masses to accept the truth when they won't simply follow the argument, right? So philosophy emphasizes logos, and I don't know how to drive that home more clearly. General requirements of a paper: make sure that you get all the boring little stuff like, removing extra spaces between paragraph, where your name is, and exactly which style guide to use, and whether you've numbered the pages, whether the margins are correct, and so on and so on. Go back through the essay assignment like a checklist and make sure you've done everything you're required to do. So your grade. It's important to keep in mind that your grade is primarily a function of how well you demonstrate that you understand the philosophy that you're dealing with. So give that a central position in your paper no matter what you write about. I do not use a grading rubric to assess your papers in philosophy, but your grade is mostly determined by how well you do in the following areas, all things considered. General requirements above, plus spelling and grammar and these sort of annoying details. They could affect your grade, but probably not too much. The real problem is that if you have a problem, say, with grammar, it will affect the clarity of your expression, and that will negatively affect your grade. So bad grammar in itself won't affect your grade directly in a philosophy paper, but the effect of bad grammar on the expression of your thought will probably do far more damage. What do I mean by following the directions here? Just incidental things like paper margins, spelling errors. I find spelling errors especially egregious, since it indicates to me that you didn't even care enough about the assignment to pay attention to spell check, right? You must have a thesis. If you don't, or if you have a weak introduction that doesn't help me understand what to expect from the rest of the paper, your grade will suffer a lot. This is a good thesis statement here. Pause and read it through. When you're done reading these sentences, you know exactly what to expect from this paper, right? It's not a philosophy paper, but it's a good thesis. Clarity. Clarity is golden. Be as clear as possible. If I get lost in your paper, your grade will suffer. Included in the notion of clarity is the overall impact of the paper, that is, how well it hangs together as a whole. So organization and structure of your ideas, sometimes professors call this the logical structure of the paper, is important. It should make sense why you're saying what you say in the order that you present your ideas, and the order that you present your ideas. Every word of the paper should be relevant to the thesis. get the philosophy right. So this is probably the biggest issue grade-wise. You need to deal with one or more of the philosophers and one or more of their ideas and get it right. Getting it right here means basically the way I presented it in class. However, maybe you disagree with my reading. In that case, you need to back up your position with evidence. It's perfectly okay to disagree with my reading or my understanding. Your understanding of the text can still count as getting the philosophy right, even if you disagree with me, so long as you make some sense of the text and is plausible. There's a lot of gray area sometimes, and in one sense, philosophers are trying to remove the gray area, and so this is why we go back and forth and argue so rigorously. Rigor might have had his own slide here. Argue rigorously. That's the logos bit again. So some additional tips. Review the general requirements listed above or listed in the assignment before you turn the paper in. Write about something that you dig. Your writing will always be better if you're personally invested in the topic, if you care about what you're writing about, and don't worry about whether or not your reader will care about it. From your perspective, they should. And that should be enough. Again, emphasize logos. Work in drafts. It's extremely unlikely that you'll be able to write an A paper on the first draft. When you think you have something that's you're more or less satisfied with, print it out and look at it again after a day or two for a fresh perspective. Have a friend read it and make comments. The idea is to try to leave yourself enough time to let your paper get cold so that you can get some objective distance when rereading it. When you finish a draft of your paper, the ideas are probably too hot, as it were, to read critically, especially if you really dig your thesis, which you should. Let it cool off a bit. Return to it. You're almost certain to want to make changes. Also, if you know that you're writing a draft, when or if you get stuck on some idea or other, you can just leave it there for later and keep writing. There's no pressure to finish yet. Be chill, play around a bit in a draft. Consciously work with drafts. And drafts there is plural. That's the big stack of papers here, right? Double check the grammar. Grammar is important because it affects clarity, and clarity is perhaps the single most important virtue of a philosophy paper. If you know that you have difficulties with grammar, whatever the reason, you should seek help with it before you turn in your final draft. I can help you. There's a writing center, etc., etc. You have a friend who's really good and doesn't have the same problems as you. You're not a native speaker. You have a friend that is a native speaker. Have them read the paper. Go to the writing center. Seek help. Quotations should be brief and should be followed by explanation. They should be well integrated. As a general rule, especially for a brief paper like ours in this class, quotations of the text should not be longer than the paragraph they're in and should be followed by a gloss, or that is an explanation of the quotation. For example, a quote from Plato's Republic. You could quote from Plato's Republic and then follow it up by something like, what Plato means here is blah, blah, blah. So you're trying to help the reader understand the philosophy, right? Quotations should mean that you should do more writing, not less. It's not a way of having to do less writing. It actually should mean that you have to write more when you quote. It makes for more work, not less. Some students throw big quotes in there thinking they're going to, means that they won't have to write as much because they can quote. That's a huge mistake. Quotation should mean more work, not less. Don't avoid quotations altogether, however, because nice, short, choice quotes from the text show that you read the text and make it clear what you're talking about. Sometimes you find a quote in the secondary literature, say, that is so much better and clearer than your own explanation, and that's fine. But supplement your explanation with the clearer explanation. Don't just let the quotation do all the work for you. Quotations should enhance the clarity of the paper, but you still need to do most of the work yourself. So we want to write prettily, right? We want stylistic grace, and that's great. But in a philosophy paper, you should strive for clarity rather than grace. If you find yourself struggling to achieve both, err on the side of clarity. The paper, after all, doesn't need to be fun to read. I get paid to read it. It does need to be clear. Avoid fluff. By fluff, I mean meaningless filler for your paper. Everything you say should be relevant to the thesis. Don't get off topic, or at least don't get off topic too far. If there's some chance that your reader might not catch how something you're saying is relevant, point it out, be explicit, even at the risk of being boring. The introduction should include a thesis. It tells us it tells the reader what to expect, what you're going to do, prove, argue for, explain, etc. What they're going to learn when they're done reading your paper, and what they should agree with when they've examined your good reasons for it. The introduction should tell the reader what they're going to do, say, prove, explain, and also, and this is a little bit different in philosophy papers than other papers, because this is more important in the introduction, I think, for a philosophy paper, how you're going to do it. So what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. How the paper is organized. Be explicit. You think of the introduction as a roadmap for the paper. Don't let your reader get lost. Part of the goal of the introduction, the first paragraph in a brief paper like ours, a little longer in a longer paper and so on, is to orient, the job is to orient the reader and let them know what to expect. Don't write a mystery. Tell your reader up front exactly what you think, what you intend to do, and how you intend to do it. What you think, why you think it, what your reasons are. Give a little roadmap or gloss summary of the whole paper. It's a bit of an abstract, right? Don't write a mystery. Sometimes English profs will tell you that you need a hook. Not so with serious writing about philosophy. The content, the thesis is the hook. Your thesis, the conclusion of your argument is the hook because it's interesting. Believe in it and don't try and dress it up. Again, ethos and pathos, all right? Logos is key. The preservation of truth through the argument is the hook. You should have in mind an honest reader who doesn't need to be hooked, since they're already hooked, as Plato might say, by the desire for the truth. Let it show. You also want to assume a certain amount of ignorance on the part of your reader. Don't expect your reader to know everything that you know, and certainly not everything that your professor knows. Your ideal reader is someone smart like you, who is generally ignorant of the subject matter or the details of your thesis, but who is really keen to understand what it is that you have to say. This attitude will help you with page length and with clarity, since you will have to explain more, and explaining adds non-fluff content to the paper, and it makes for clearer writing. An exception to this rule is assuming the ignorance of your... An exception here would be assuming... you should not, in a short paper, like the ones that you're likely to write in this class, say 6 to 12 page papers, you can't always assume total ignorance, right? Let's say you don't want to spend a bunch of time in a 5-page paper, say 2 pages, explaining the whole plot of The Matrix. You can safely assume that your reader has seen the movie and get on with explaining the philosophy. Or double the length of the paper to include discussion of the plot of the film. Sometimes it helps also to say things twice in different ways. It helps, especially if it's something you know is difficult and is hard to explain. Say it more than once in different ways. It always helps also to use examples. Anytime you can use an example. Using secondary sources, even the internet, can be helpful for your paper, though not necessary for the sorts of papers you would write in a lower division philosophy course. However, if you use outside sources, you absolutely must let your reader know about it. You do this by attribution of an idea, example, etc., directly in the text or in a footnote. If you use the exact words of someone else, you need an attribution and quote marks. We need to know who said it and exactly what they said. I talk more about this in class, but you need to know how to learn to avoid plagiarism. If you're unsure, err on the side of caution. Secondary sources show that you care enough about a topic, or at least your grade, to check your understanding against that of others. How does your reader know this if you don't attribute the ideas that you've included to enhance your paper? Play, my friends, is the best practice. I encourage you to experiment a little. Adopt words that are new to your paper. Take some risks. Part of my job is to point out where you make errors, and if you never risk correction, you won't benefit from it. Keep in mind, be bold. Don't tell me what you feel or what seems to be the case or what's just your opinion. You should make strong statements that make claims to truth, not just for you, but for everyone. Don't tell your reader what merely might be the case, or what seems to be what Plato means, or just what you might think is important, or just what you think is important. Tell them what is the case, what is important, how they should read Plato. It's better to make a well-defended, well-argued, informed claim and end up getting it wrong than to fail to defend or argue for any claim at all. Take a risk. Be bold and boldly experiment with ideas. Play with them. See if you can break them. See how well they hold up under pressure. Revise out wimpy, milquetoast language from your final polished draft. Also, you're not married to your ideas, your thoughts, or your thesis, or anything that you write. Feel free to change your mind tomorrow or the next day. Try to get it right, but don't worry too much if you don't. If it turns out that you're wrong, you can change your mind. But argue as though you're absolutely certain, right? Finally, be proud of your writing. Work hard and produce a polished bit of writing that you can be proud of.